11,000 years ago, someone made a decision. They didn't leave a small child's body where she died. They carried her to a cave. They placed their best things beside her. Perforated shell beads, a pendant made from a deer tooth, objects someone had worked to make, objects someone had carried with them. And they left them there, with her, in the dark. In 2026, a team of researchers at the University of Lancashire extracted Dina from those bone fragments. It was the first time anyone could say with scientific certainty who the oldest person ever identified in northern Britain actually was. A girl. She was between 2.5 and 3.5 years old when she died. She lived 11,000 years ago, when the glaciers had only just retreated from these lands, when forests were still learning to grow in soils the ice had occupied for thousands of years. And someone, in that new and difficult world, loved her enough to do all of that. Great Urswick is a village in the south of Cumbria, in northwest England. It doesn't appear in many history books. No famous ruins, no celebrated battles. There are farms, dry stone walls, and hills where the limestone breaks through the grass as if it wants to say something. In 2016, a local archaeologist named Martin Stables began excavating a small cave on the edge of the village, Heaning Wood Bone Cave. Stables wasn't a university professor. He was the kind of archaeologist Britain produces, someone with training, with experience, with decades of accumulated local knowledge, and with the patience to excavate 1 square metre for weeks if that ANAC 39's what it takes. The cave was known, others had visited it before, but nobody had excavated it systematically with modern techniques. Stables thought it was worth trying. Limestone caves in northern England are time traps. What falls inside, stays inside. Sediment covers it, stone preserves it. And if nobody digs, it can remain for millennia without anyone knowing. Stables started with the most recent layers. He found remains from the Bronze Age, around 4,000 years old. Then deeper from the Neolithic, around 5,500 years old. And then he reached something older. The deepest remains were different, more fragmented, more fragile. So small that in another context they might have been discarded by accident. Stables collected them carefully and sent them for analysis. Act 2, what was inside when the analyses came back, the cave turned out to be far more than Stables had suspected. At least 8 people had been buried there. Not by accident, not from a collapse or from dying inside. Someone had carried them there deliberately, at 3 separate moments thousands of years apart. 4,000 years ago, 5,500, and 11,000. The same cave, the same place. 3 different communities who never knew each other, who didn't in hashtag 39T speak the same language, who probably had no awareness that before them other people had done the same thing in that exact spot, and yet they chose the same cave. There in hashtag 39's, a name for this in archaeology, persistent ritual use. It means a specific place for reasons archaeologists can't always fully explain, holds symbolic or spiritual importance for different groups across very long periods. It's not unusual to find it. There are sites across the British Isles with this pattern spanning thousands of years, but finding it in northern Cumbria, in a small unnamed cave, in remains this ancient, that is unusual. And then there were the objects. Alongside the oldest remains, they found perforated shell beads. The shell comes from the coast, several kilometres from the cave, and a pendant made from a deer tooth that someone had drilled a hole through to hang it. All dated to the same period as the bones, 11,000 years ago. Someone made those beads. Someone perforated them. Someone walked from the coast or obtained them some other way, and then left them there, in the darkness of a cave, with the body of this person, who turned out to be a girl under 4 years old. Act 3. the dinner. Extracting Dina from 11,000-year-old remains is hard. Not impossible, we saw that with Vitrop Man and with Titsi, but hard. The most fragile bones, the most fragmented, those that have spent millennia in variable conditions, may not have preserved enough genetic material for analysis. These remains were small. Fragmented, the team didn't an #39 know if there would be enough viable Dina. There was. The Dina confirmed the sex. Female, it was the first time any individual this old in northern Britain could be identified with certainty in both age and sex through genetic analysis. And the genetic profile said something more. Her ancestry was that of Western European Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, the same type of genetic profile found in individuals of this era at other sites across the British Isles and the continent. A population that arrived in Western Europe tens of thousands of years ago, that survived the last glaciation sheltering in the south, and that recolonised the north as the ice retreated. This girl was part of that wave, one of the first people, perhaps literally among the very first, to live in what is now northern England after the ice left. Pontus Skoglund of the Wellcome Sanger Institute in Cambridge, who took part in the genetic analysis, described the find as a rare window into the least understood period of British prehistory. The Mesolithic, the 10,000 years between the end of the ice and the arrival of farming, is a period we know very little about. Remains are scarce, traces, faint. This girl is one of the few voices from that silence. Act 4. The world she lived in. To understand what this find means, you have to try to picture the world this girl lived in. 11,000 years ago, Britain wasn't Hanslack 39, Tian Island yet. Sea levels were lower than now. What is today the North Sea was a fertile plain, with rivers, lakes and forests. Archaeologists call it Doggerland. It stretched from what is now eastern England to what are now the Netherlands and Denmark. People could walk, and did, from the continent to the lands we now call Britain without crossing any sea. Glaciers had occupied the north of the islands for thousands of years. When they began to retreat, they left behind a broken new landscape. Rock, mud, newly formed lakes. Rivers finding their way across terrain that had never had water before. And then the trees. First birches and alders which grow fast in poor soils. Then, slowly, oaks, hazels, ashes. Within a few human generations, northern Cumbria went from a landscape of stone and ice to forest. In that forest lived deer, the same deer whose tooth someone made into the pendant found alongside this girl. Her parents, or whoever cared for her, didn't plant crops. They had no livestock. They lived from what the forest and rivers gave them. Game, fish, berries, roots. They were experts in that world. Generations of learning how to read it. And they formed communities. With rituals. With objects that held meaning. With places to bring their dead. Heaning Wood Cave was one of those places. Someone walked to that cave carrying the body of a girl under 4 years old. We don an #39 to know how far they walked. We don't know if it was night or day. We don't know if others were with them. We know they left the shell beads, the deer tooth. And we know the cave was used to bury others, thousands of years later, as if the place held something that generations who never knew each other were able to recognise. Closing. What remains in the stone Heaning Wood Bone Cave is still there. Martin Stables has been excavating for 10 years. He says there and #39S more that the site hasn't and #39T given up everything it holds. Hez probably right. What we already know is enough to change something. For decades, the official account of northern England's prehistory started with the Neolithic, when farmers arrived and left stone monuments. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers were a footnote. People who passed through, left no mark, were erased by time. This girl disproves that. There were communities in northern Cumbria 11,000 years ago who buried their dead with care, who made objects, who chose places, who had ways of saying goodbye to their own. They weren't rootless nomads. They were people with places of their own. Dina told us she was a girl. It told us she was between 2.5 and 3.5 years old. It told us her ancestry was that of the first Europeans to recolonize the north after the ice. What the Dina can #39 tell us is the name they gave her, what she meant to the people who lost her, why they chose that particular cave. Those things left with them, but the deer tooth that someone drilled a hole through and placed beside her, that one is still here. And in a way it says more than anything else. Every bloodline tells the truth. Even that of a 3-year-old girl who had been waiting 11,000 years for someone to ask,